Okay, great. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long road. I think it was several years ago, actually, when I read your book, Mashka.
Yes,
I did the review on it back then. I'm a reviewer for the International Writers Inspiring Change, and I host their podcast as well.
I see.
Um, so let me just introduce officially. So we're on the International Writers Inspiring Change platform. That's this, which, as you know, we do book features, book reviews, and we promote authors. And then they recently launched just a few months back this podcast, which is called the Author Shout Out Podcast. So we've been inviting authors to join us. And here we are with Sophia Gallegos. Is that how you say your last name? Gallegos?
It's pronounced Gallegos.
Gallegos.
Gallegos. Yes, it's a Spanish
It,
name.
it's a Spanish name. Okay, great.
Yes.
And am I pronouncing Mashka right?
Mashka. Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. That's
That's
an interesting combination. You're Spanish and you wrote a book about the Russian czars.
well, my next book will be more Spanish oriented.
It doesn't matter. I was just noting it. Well, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And we're talking to you where? You're in which city are you in Mountain Time?
I'm in Cedar Hill, New Mexico. Just
Okay.
kind of, yeah, just 4 miles south of the Colorado border. And it's in the Four Corners area of the United States, which is the area that unites Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico.
Wow, sounds like a great, and probably very beautiful too.
Well, it's a high desert area, and so we're very prone to drought and always drought conditions. But in the last couple of weeks and last month, actually, we've received record rains. So everything is just amazingly green and very unlike what I'm used to. But sometimes I look out my back door and it takes my breath away how beautiful it is.
Is it like a high desert?
It's a high mountain desert here. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've driven through there before. I used to live in Los Angeles and travel back
Okay.
and forth. So,
Yeah.
all right. Well, so we're talking to Sophia Gallegos.
Gallegos. That's right. Very good.
Gallegos, author of Mashka, and of course, we'll talk about your upcoming work too. So tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Sophia?
Well, I'm by nature a very introverted person. I'm almost a recluse, but I'm also very curious. So if I have a question about anything, I'm just always craving an answer. I'm one of those characters that thinks there's always got to be a reason for something. But I've always been interested in history and also genealogy. So I've always been an avid reader. I've always been drawn, because of my interest in history, I've always been drawn to historical fiction. And the reason historical fiction is because a lot of times I might pick up a book on history, and unless it's an exceptional book, like the book that Robert Massey wrote about the Romanov family, they tend to be kind of dry, And so for my tastes, it seems that the good thing about historical fiction is you still get the background and the drama from the actual historical facts, but it kind of adds a more human, a more red-blooded kind of feel to it, because the story is usually about people and their quirks and their the good side and the bad side, and so it was just always a little bit more lifelike to me to read.
Yeah, more color, more color
more
to
color,
it.
definitely.
Why
And
did you
so,
pick why did you pick that family, the Tzarist family? What drew
well,
you to that particular story?
well, it was amazing to me that, I mean, in wartime, in revolution, there's always um, the chance, the risk of, lots of deaths, but usually it's not the people at the very top, who wind up
Mm,
losing their lives, know.
right. To the guys down in the lower echelons.
That's that's the bad thing about um uh it shocked me that just a little over, and when I first learned about it, I was still a child, maybe 9 or 10 years old, that it was less than 100 years ago. The leaders of the biggest country, arrival of the United States, were completely executed, and not just the leader, but his family. And I
Mm,
just thought that it shocked me even as a child. So I was always interested in that story. And so when I came across Robert Massey's book, and it read to me like a novel. I mean, there was no, kind of um, dry historical type of narrative going on there. It was just all very consumable to me. And so
mm,
I I just, I just ate it up. And I guess what made it, the reason he was able to do what he did with his book, is because, I guess Robert Massey, he has a child who also has hemophilia.
mm,
And as you know, the heir to the Russian throne at the time that they were executed, the son, he was born with hemophilia, so he was um, almost bedridden, certainly at the end of his life, when he and his family were executed, but um, almost all of his childhood, and he only, when they were executed, I think he was 14 years old. So it was really a rough road, and it was so heartbreaking because his mother um, had four girls before she had him, and her lifelong dream, or lifelong goal, if you will, was to produce an heir for her husband and for the country. And so
right.
it was so heartbreaking when he was born, that they learned that he would be, an invalid for most of his life and might not even survive into adulthood. So there was real heartbreak in that family,
Yeah.
and with any family, with or without a certain amount of heartbreak, there's always a lot of, interesting dynamics. That's another one of my interests, is I think is family dynamics. Why are we the way that we are? How did we come into this world with, our individual quirks and, personalities and outlook and, perspective? How did that happen to us? And I'm convinced that a lot of it has to do with the families that we were raised in, and it's not just the influence of our parents, but also our siblings,
Mm. Yeah,
our
the matrix that we grew up in. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So one book led to another, one nonfiction book led to another, one question led to another. And I just kept building and building and building until I had a stack of books this high, that I had read, and I always was on the lookout for a good historical fiction on this family, and never ran across one that, I could really get into.
Yeah. Like you
So
said, the historical ones tend to be quite dry and just,
it is,
it's
and
chronological events. That's all.
well, if when you read nonfiction, they're telling a story. They are, but they're kind of within limits. I mean, all of it's annotated. They have to back up the story that they're telling with, other resources. It's got to be corroborated. And so they're
Right.
within those limits. And sometimes within those limits, for instance, I wound up writing this book from the perspective of Maria, the middle child in
Right.
in the Tsar's family. Um, it seemed to me that there were so many questions about Maria, so many little interesting things that happened that were somewhat addressed in the nonfiction books I was reading, but because they were unfounded, um, there was it was kind of just left to, well, we know something happened, or they might give a kind of a pat kind of reason. For instance, her parents really.
What's her romance? Let me just answer that. Was her romance? I mean, she had a little fling there in the book.
Yes.
Was that fiction or fact?
Well, in quite a number of the nonfiction books that I've read, they do allude to some sort of the closest they would get to saying that there was a fling is that it was said that Maria and one of the guards was discovered together.
Okay.
They were discovered
I get it.
together. So I mean, and some of them even name him, which is why I named him Ivan. And but there's very little to go on. There's just no, the most we have to go on are the statements that were given by the guards themselves, long after the execution had happened.
It's kind of interesting because I found that, I mean, like it's a bit of a tragic story, obviously,
It is, yes.
but the romance, that little thread that you kept going there through the book, it gave it, like you said, it gives you a human quality, and it doesn't. So she got a chance to live some life before she died, and that was
sure, yes. And of all the characters, or of all the children that the Tsar Nicholas and his wife had, it seemed to me that she came across as the most maybe down to earth, human. She was always recounted as easily relating to the guards. They liked her the best. It was also interesting, and one of the questions that I was never really able to answer right away is, why did Maria's parents choose her to accompany them to Ekaterinburg when her father finally got arrested in Siberia, to be taken ostensibly to go to trial in Moscow, but they never made it that far. And it was real unclear to this day exactly all the double dealing going on. The person that was sent to escort them to the trial, it was never really clear which side was he on. He was working for the Bolsheviks, but then later on he was discovered to be, he went over to the whites, which are were the monarchists. So it wasn't ever clear what the whole purpose of that, of taking the Tsar and his wife and Maria away to Ekaterinburg, without the other children.
Probably somewhat intended. When you think about historical, it's probably entering the obscurity so nobody can actually get the real picture.
Right. Everybody's kind of out for themselves, and let's see how the chips fall, and how how I might benefit from it. Everybody was out for themselves, and he, for being the most the supreme, leader of his people, he wound it just being just simply a pawn, a pawn in a great, grand, horrible, tragic scheme. But in any case, her parents chose her out of all the other children to accompany them. It was really her mother. And I always thought, why Maria? She wasn't the oldest. She wasn't even she wasn't even very highly revered by her mother. So why her? And it wasn't until I discovered, of all the books that I read, I never got a clear answer. And it wasn't until I discovered an account from a footman that was posted on a website that I'm just a big fan of on this subject, and it's called the Alexander Palace Time Machine. And it was set up by a fella named Robert Atchison, and he's an American. And I guess he had this same interest too, and he designed and set up this wonderful website that's got tons of pictures, tons of statements, a couple of books on this.
About the Tsar family. It's about the Tsar family, right?
On the Tsar's family. On this particular, when we say the Tsar, there have been many Tsars, but this was the last Tsar,
Yeah.
And so it was
ostensibly, because of course Putin is trying to pick up the same.
he's
he's trying to be the new Tsar.
He is. For all intents and purposes, they've come full circle. But anyway, this account given by this footman kind of really illuminated for me why Maria was chosen to go. And basically it was that she wasn't her mother's favorite, but she was her very special to her father, and her father was everything to her. I mean, there were a couple of times when she just kept begging to go with him when he would go off to headquarters for the war or whatever, right. she just really was attached to her father. And so when it was announced to the family that they would be taking the Tsar away, either by force, either you go quietly, or we can make this easier, we can make this hard, but either way you're going to go. Right. And so her mother right away said, "You're not taking him without me. I'm going." And they said, "Well, you can go if you want, But they said, the parents said, "Look, we've got this ill. Our son is very ill. He's in bed right now. We can't move him. He can't be moved. Cannot we delay this?" And they said, "No, you're coming now." And so they chose Maria to go with them. And basically it was because and also her mother kind of had this, I guess you would call it a foot dragging kind of scheme in the back of her head, that if they were going to be taken away, she would cause, if she could, some kind of maybe delay or some kind of incident, on the way, so that they might have time to be rescued. I think the Tsar and his wife always had in their mind, up until their very last moment, not only the hope, but almost the expectation that
it's a little bit delusional when you consider the circumstances. It's almost comparable to the aristocracy in France when they were beheading, Marie Antoinette and those guys. Yes. Yeah. It's this delusion that nobody's going to take us out.
Yeah. They're not going to take us out. They're going to, someone's going to save this. Someone's going to come to their senses, right, and see that this isn't, well, that didn't happen. And their delusions never disappeared.
You made a quote. I stole a few quotes from your bio, by the way, to take them up. But one of them I found very interesting, because you talked about in that your stories, you write compelling story. You said, quote, compelling stories begin with children in crisis.
Yes. Yes.
And that was essentially what you were talking about here. It's a story
Yes.
about the children and particularly
Yes.
Maria.
Yes. Yeah.
Mhm.
I used to work in the court system in Washington
Okay.
State, and we dealt with all kinds of cases, criminal cases, divorce cases, probate cases. But the most interesting to me were the family law cases involving children. And so many times when, he said this and she said that, mom said this and dad said that, and the court doesn't know who to believe. So they'll hire an investment, just somebody who's going to visit the home and interview all the kids and the parents and everybody who's close to the family and issue a report. And it was so interesting to me one day during a proceeding, um, when this reporter, this investigator, was giving testimony, and she described what her job was, and she described um, interviewing children and getting the child's account of what was going on in the family. And she said, kids are always kind of like overlooked and dismissed, but she says, they're the perfect little spies. She says they're the
I think
perfect little spies.
I think that's a really good point, because I think it tends to be that they're just sort of seen as what's the word? Like as if they can't see the real truth or what's really going on. But kids
Yes,
actually are very perceptive.
very, very perceptive. And their account is always a lot more credible than somebody who's trying to run who has, and also, I mean, they have a lot to lose, but they have a lot more
They
to
don't have the
gain.
same agenda that they don't have the same agenda that adults have. Adults have this
No.
trying to cover up or
Yes,
whatever, but the
yes,
kids are just straight up. They're so
yeah,
transparent.
yeah, yeah. So
But
this,
I think it's a beautiful quote though. Compelling stories begin with children in crisis. I think
yes,
that is
yeah, and those are the kinds of stories I've always been drawn to, whether they were historic or not. I remember uh, I give myself a few hours, every month to go into the library and just root around and see what I could find. And I would read book jacket after book jacket, just looking for a story that would, grab me. And it always had to do with children. It always had to do with, children.
must have been a tough job though, listening to these stories of children in the court
Oh
cases.
yeah. Oh yeah. It definitely recolored my world.
Yeah, I can
But it
imagine.
was very interesting.
Well, that's good. So, I mean, I'm assuming though that your next book, you're working on another book now. Is
Yes,
that correct?
yes, yes.
Is that also following the same line? Children in
Um,
crisis, or is it
yes,
motivated differently? Yeah.
yes.
You don't have to tell us what the book is about necessarily if you don't want to.
Well, my interest in genealogy led me to discover that one of my third great grandmothers had kind of an interesting beginning. Her parents decided to join a number of other families when they decided to relocate from northern New Mexico to the San Luis Valley in Colorado. And this was during a time of always a lot of skirmishes and a lot of tension and aggressions with the local Native Americans here, which is mostly the Ute tribe. And
Mm.
so, yeah, so I was able to kind of turn everything that I learned into an interesting kind of fictional story based
But
on.
based on some actual events
Yes, yes,
from
yes,
your own family history.
Yes, yes,
That's
yeah,
that's fascinating.
it is. It was, like, as I said, I think I started really, I traced my interest back to genealogy back when that old mini series came out on television that everybody was in the 70s, Roots. And at that
Mm,
time, yeah, everybody was, oh, interested um, in their family history. But I'd always been interested, and I became even more interested then. Well, it was around that time that I asked my grandmother to if I could borrow some old daguerreotype photos that she had that were passed down to her from her father. And
mm.
she let me borrow them and copy them. And then I returned them to her during a holiday event. And luckily, my grandmother, who was always very kind of terse and closed mouth, very private, she had a little bit to drink during that event, and I was able to kind of corner her and take some notes about history that she probably otherwise wouldn't have wanted to share if she hadn't had a few belts under, a few drinks under her
It's an
belt.
interesting point though that you bring up that parents or grandparents intend to like stem
Yeah.
giving historical relevance on the family and what happened back in
Yeah.
these days,
It's all a big hush hush secret, and
Yeah.
even though she was a little bit drunk at the time, she'd say, you're writing that down. She says, you're not going to have you're not going to assume that my mother was pregnant without being married, are you? And I said, no, no, grandma, I'm not going to do that, but it wasn't just her. There's families, and I think from all over the world, and every kind of from every nation, every nationality, every race. There's always this. We've got to keep the past quiet. Even the
Yeah.
things that happened to them that they had nothing to do with it. This was just bad luck. Even bad luck was something to keep private, to keep secret. So, but
It's kind of like, if you're doing I'm not saying this with reference to you, but you're doing a genealogy track down in the family and find out that
oh yeah.
250 years ago, your great, 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 whatever was a serial killer.
That's very funny because one of my dad's third cousin, he had some extra cash to throw around, and so he hired a genealogist to do a study of our family, because like I said, our family was one of the group of families that left their homes in northern New Mexico to settle in the San Luis Valley. And so it was kind of an interesting, but so when this genealogy published this book and had several copies made, a lot of the family members, oh, they rushed, including myself, to order themselves a copy of this book. And so for a while there amongst the family, there was a lot of phone calls and communications. Have you read the book? Did you read this? Did you read that? And finally, one of my dad's cousins said, oh, I had to put away that book. I was afraid I was going to find out I was my own grandmother.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's take a look at another one here. I mean, I've written down a couple of quotes I wanted to talk about. Um, you also said, and again, I thought this was a great quotation. Quote, art is a fire-breathing entity, and suffering is the oxygen on which it feeds.
Yeah,
That is a brilliant statement. It's a pretty deep statement.
it is. It is.
You, how do you how give us a little background on that? What does that
Well,
mean to you?
you know, I'm not I was raised Catholic.
Mm,
We're not real Bible thumping, Catholics aren't real Bible thumping. They take most of the direction from the church itself and the Pope, so but there are a few real compelling Bible stories that leak through, in what Catholics learn. I mean, I went to Catholic school and the whole bit, and so I remember looking at a calendar that we got at church one year, and the picture on the calendar was of, let me get this straight because I don't know exactly, but was it Abraham felt he was ordered by God to sacrifice one of his sons. And so this picture on the calendar had the picture of this man, this ancient man in his robes and everything, and he had his son down on this rock, and he was about to, cut his throat,
Crush his head or something.
Yeah. And for a little kid, I just was like, wow, why is he doing that? And so I always had that image in my mind. And so as I grew, older, and I always thought, why do we have to go through all this suffering? Why do such bad things happen? Why do bad things happen to good people? And it's a question that a lot of people have, and
Yeah.
and how much all of us go to certain lengths to avoid suffering. Nobody likes to suffer, but yet suffering is what makes us. If it doesn't break us, it makes us. And that's something that I've learned, in my older years. And it was just by observing that, and questioning, why all this suffering, why all this pain, and even I saw a quote in on a calendar a few days ago. I think it was from the book of James. I'm not sure what it was, but it addressed the suffering component of life, and it really spoke to me again about, though we try to avoid it and nobody wants pain and suffering, it's an important part of forming us into, kind of like
who we are.
enriching our souls.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. I just finished reading a book by an author, an American author, actually, where he talks about his own journey through, he lost his mother and he went into heavy grief and depression. But he talked about how suffering is a similar concept what you just said. It roots you, and in suffering, that's where you start to grow, because, he talks about, you have to go. People talk about suffering and being low as something bad, and they just like to talk about the upside of life. But in actual fact, the mud is where you kind of grow the roots, and it has to grow from there. And so it's an essential part of living. So suffering shouldn't be viewed as something bad. It's just part of life, like you said.
I mean, it's bad. It's hard. It's painful, but we have to go through it. And it makes us. If it doesn't break us, then it's going to make us. And I mean, how else would we come forward with all these stories, if only good things happened, it's making it through the storm and being able to come out on the other side and say, listen what happened to me.
That's the contrast of life. That's the color. It's the black and white. You don't know if you only see white, you never know what black is.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyhow, that's great. Now I understand that quote better. And I have another one here. So you're talking in your bio about your passion, and you said, quote, this is more or less a quote, or you said passion, you have a passion to write stories that give a voice to women and children silenced by systemic oppression.
Yeah. Well, I mean, nobody listens to women and children. Well, if they're listening to women, they don't usually want to listen to women.
No.
I feel anyway. And that's a female perspective. I get that, but I don't think that men understand how difficult it is to be born into a role that, I mean, is just so profoundly unfair. I mean, it's like, I'm a human just like you are. I have feelings and value just like you do, but
Mhm.
I'm always going to have to take a back seat because of the system that is, has been set up. And so, and children are in the same way. You mentioned earlier that a lot of times children are a lot more genuine and truthful and credible than, their adult counterparts. I mean, we have children, women and children have, if you can give them a voice, you're going to benefit. You're going to learn something. If you're wise, if you're prudent, it's they have a value, and what they have, their perspective, what they have to say, what they can bring to you is is very valuable. And
I agree. I agree.
yeah, yeah.
So that brings up an interesting question. I mean, a little bit philosophical, but do children have more voice today, do you think? Or are they still sort of being backseated and treated like they're just not mature enough to have a say in the game?
Well, I mean, it, so much of that by the time, I mean, theoretically, you could say, yeah, they do have more of a voice. I mean, they have social media now. They can, a child can get on any platform and say and do things that, children would never be allowed to do. And
Right.
is that valuable? Um, I think the thing is that by the time um, a child gets to the point where maybe they're, um, communicating in the way that they feel compelled to communicate, there's already so much that has gone on, that maybe if we had listened before this, maybe we wouldn't have this out of control child now, maybe there
Yeah.
wouldn't be all this ugliness and, just mischief that sometimes turns into pure evil,
Mm,
but I think, you know, giving voice or giving attention to what a child has to say, or communicate, if it's done in a timely way, they definitely should have more say.
mm.
But if you,
But do you think that children are we still dealing with a culture of silence? Because when you look at it, children are silenced a lot by
yeah,
adults who either don't want to listen to what they have to say, or maybe they don't want to confront the fact that
right,
okay, we know obviously cases of abuse or trauma or violence,
sure.
but that culture of silence, we're still dealing with that today.
Yes, yes, for sure. But in my view, it's not so much silence, it's the hypocrisy. It's the hypocrisy. In other words, um, we don't, you know, we don't want the children to just be able to say and do anything that they want to do, although adults, don't want to be limited in that way at all. We want to, adults want to be able to have no limits,
And they
and
want
so,
freedom.
yeah. And so children see this and they're like, this just, I mean, there's no greater spark, if you will, or uh, pro anything more provocative, I think, to a child than hypocrisy. You know, it
Yeah.
sticks with you, you never forget it, I mean, it's just like, I mean, there, this is kind of a stupid quote. It just popped into my mind, but it's from a popular modern song, and it says, my dad took my smokes away. I asked him, and he said, no way. And he said that the line goes, that hypocrite smokes 2 packs a day. So, I mean, it's a timeless thing. It's always been there, but I think it's hypocrisy that really is what is the layer that counts in all of this on this particular subject.
That's a good point. I tend to agree with you there. Okay, and then on the subject of women, because of course you talk about women being silenced by systemic oppression. Obviously, in a patriarchal society, like you said, they're kind of backseated. That's still going on.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Women are still fighting for their rights. And okay, I'm not trying to single out America on this, but Wade and Roe, and all the abortion rights being taken away. It seems like it's a bit regressive on your side of the ocean.
Oh, it definitely is. And I have to confess that I was still in delusion, in a state of delusion about that up until this last election, in 2024. I could not believe how many people would prefer to have a leader. Let's not go into that. Let's just say a leader with questionable skills versus having a woman. They just would not have a woman in any case. And it's not just men who have this view. There are a lot of women too. We women.
I mean, it's a fact that America is one of the few nations left on earth that has never had a female president.
No, even Mexico
never had a female leader.
Even Mexico has recently elected a female leader. And I don't think it will happen, not in my lifetime anyway. They're just this last election really illuminated that for me, and it was heartbreaking. But I can't say. I mean, I made that quote long before this, so it's not something that should have surprised me. But I had to say, it didn't just surprise me, but it was shocking to me how, if you look at the map of how many counties and areas elected, the male leader with questionable skills versus the female choice. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's great though that you push that agenda to give women voice and children voice, because they are equals in our society. They should be equals in all respects. A woman should have the power to say, I want to have the baby or I don't want to have the baby, but we have men in suits and black ties who are making those decisions otherwise. So.
Yeah. Well, we're all humans, and we have to look upon each other as humans. And when we don't do that, when we fail to do that, there will just be, it just causes endless suffering. It, exacerbates the suffering that we already, can expect from life on this planet. It just compounds it.
Yeah, exactly. Shouldn't be going on in a democracy, though.
No, it should not. But even there are some who even, nowadays are saying, have we been living in a democracy? Is this what democracy is? Is it just too much, pie in the sky kind of ideal that, we are failing so badly at it that we can't even, we dare not even, suggest that we're reaching toward democracy, much less to say, we live in a democracy. I beg to differ. I don't think that we are.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. So, have you got a title for the new book that you're working on?
Yeah, and it's not set in stone. Um, but my my third great grandmother's name was Juana. She was in the family, I guess she was called Juanita, but she was one of the Martinez family. Um, the name Martinez um, is really a plural form of Martin. And so the Martin Serrano family were um, the pioneers, really, if you will, is a great pioneer family that made their way up from Mexico through Texas. Actually, a lot of them were descended from Sephardic Jews who were expelled from Spain. And so landed in the New World, and particularly in the area of Mexico. And there were all along the way, there were a lot of intermarrying with the natives. And so we have a very rich genealogical history. And so,
Okay.
um, but
Well, when is there you got a target date for this book to come out?
no, I don't. I set a date for myself for Mashka as the 100-year anniversary of the execution, which was would have been June, July of 2018. That would have been 100 years. This I haven't set a goal, and I probably should, because I think it helped me. It helped me reach completion. I tend to be kind of a perfectionist, and maybe too much so. Sometimes you just have to, like Shelby Foote says, just kind of fly by the seat of your pants, and let some of this little stuff go, but the title will more than likely have the name Juana of de los Martins, de los Martinez. So the plural version of Martin is Martinez. So.
Well, you have to let us know at IWIC here when you're ready for that. When that book comes out, we'd love to, feature it, and I'd love to read and review it.
I will do that, and thank you so much for offering that. It's a very big honor and compliment to me.
Well, I think that what you're doing, I mean, I really admire the fact that when you have an agenda you're a writer, but you're also pushing a humanitarian agenda in your stories, and I think that's really cool. That really stands out. Okay, so now I have one last question for you before we end off.
Okay.
What singular tip would you give to a novice, a new writer coming into the fray here on the subject?
Well, just recently, I watched a YouTube video about an interview with Shelby Foote. He's one of my favorite authors. His specialty was Civil War history, the American Civil War, and Southern writers always seem to me to have such I don't know, either you call it an advantage or a disadvantage, in that they just have so much richness to draw upon, so much suffering to draw upon. But his advice was just don't be afraid to fly by the seat of your pants. You don't need an education necessarily to write. You just need something to write about, and writing is an art. It comes on, all art comes from someplace. It's honorable to give voice to that, and so, but there's also something else, another favorite quote that I got just recently from Winston Churchill, actually, and he was talking about you know, the struggle during wartime, but I think this would apply to any struggle. And he says, success is not final, um, failure is not fatal, and it's the courage to continue the struggle that counts. And so it's easy when you're writing, when you're in the middle of a writing project, or you've just begun and you're already defeated, you've already given up. But it just takes push yourself to have courage to continue on and just keep on keeping on. And I think anybody who's driven to do this might be surprised to find where they might end up with their project.
That's great. That's a good one. I want to leave you with one quote, by the way. It was a quote I read the other day. I don't even remember who it was described to, but it said something like, half of the world's population are women. The other half are their children.
I love that. I'm going to write that down.
Isn't that great? I mean, it was so compelling. I went, okay, that's totally true.
I love that. I saw something kind of silly on YouTube. It's this woman, she's an African American woman, but she started this informal club called the We Don't Care Much Anymore Club. And she says she's directed it toward women of menopause age. But one of the things she just kind of goes on a rant about things that we don't much care about anymore. And one of the things she said was, we don't care if we have to ask our son to help us with our phone, or any technology. She says, we helped them when they were learning to wipe their butts growing up. So we don't care if you want to mock us or whatever about needing help with our phone. So I mean, it's just like, mothers raised all these people, all these leaders, all these, that everybody has had a mother and depended on a mother.
That's it.
And
That's it. It's easy to forget that perspective, but without mothers, we wouldn't have anything.
It's easy to forget that. Yes. And motherhood, don't get me wrong, motherhood has been overly romanticized. There aren't enough of us who have had, great mothers, and it's almost an impossible task fraught with so much sacrifice and suffering to be a mother, that it's hard to wind up, being considered, a good mother. But nevertheless, all of us came from mothers.
That's right. Well, what we're going to do is the iWIC people will actually take this podcast and they'll post it to the podcast page, which you can see on the website. You can refer people to see the podcast anytime.
Okay.
They'll also send you a copy of the podcast video, so you can post it on your sites or whatever you want to do.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So again, Sophia Gallegos.
Gallegos, yes.
Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I was glad to be here.
Yep. Have a great week. And we'll hear from you in the future.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.